Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. We are back. I am Tony Gerdeman, here once again, finally, as always, with Tom Orr. Your long national nightmare is over. We are back. For now, I don't know what's going to happen over the 4th. We'll figure it out. We didn't quite figure it out very well this past time, but that's not our fault. Tom, how are you doing?
I'm great. I'm so excited to be back. What are we talking about tonight? Is this some kind of woodworking podcast? I forget. What are we talking about tonight?
Really, we just talk about what we did during the day. Today I watched, I always have the Discovery Channel and the Travel Channel on. So today it was America Unearthed with noted geologist Scott Walter. I don't know if you ever watched that. Pretty interesting. Got a lot of conspiracies and stuff like that. I listen. I watch those shows. Thinking the Ark of the Covenant may have been in America. What do you think about that, Tom? Your take?
I was curious what kind of geology conspiracies you could possibly be coming up with.
Quite a few.
You're saying those rocks are full of schist?
Tom, let's just start over.
That is the best geology joke you are ever going to hear.
3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody. We are back. And all of our glory. So we're thankful that you guys have stayed subscribed and that you're back listening to us. And we apologize for being away. Not really apologize, but I'm not sorry. I enjoyed my break. Tom, did you enjoy your break?
Yeah, it was fine. I missed. I did miss talking about Ohio State football. That was it was tough, but. And this was supposed to be a quiet time of year, and then all of a sudden, everything, all heck broke loose during the couple weeks we were off.
Yeah, and the last show we did do, Julian Fleming committed the day or two before, but I totally ended the show before we got to talk to him. Talked about that because, Tom, it was below my screen on my laptop. I didn't scroll far enough down, so. That's partly my fault. But when I was ending the show, you could have said, oh, hey, but you didn't. So, who's really to blame? Who knows? Let's not get into an argument here in front of everybody. We can do that off the air. So while we were gone, the Buckeyes did land 4 commits that we really haven't talked about yet. The first was, I don't know if I think it was the first. And I'm going to say his name, Grant Toutant. Tom, is that how you would say it?
That is how I would say it.
Or would you go Toutant?
I would say Toutant, but I think it's I think either one is acceptable.
So he flipped from Penn State, and I remember I think you texted me when it happened, and you're like, "Hey, you see this?" And I think we were both like, "Who is this guy?" Once he, back then, way back then, 2 weeks ago, when a guy would commit to Penn State, you would just assume he was going to go there. Now we know, though, that when they commit to Penn State, that just means they're getting ready to commit somewhere else. It's like Frogger. When you jump on one spot, that doesn't mean you're going to stay there. You're going from one spot to the next. Penn State, committing to Penn State, I think, is like Frogger. Now we know that. We didn't know that before. You don't commit there and stay there. You commit there and then go somewhere else. So he is another 4-star offensive lineman. The 3-star in the composite. The number 32 offensive tackle out of Warren, Michigan. And, it's good. He always, I guess, get some of the guys out of Michigan. But he, even being that 3-star guy, Tom, he's still rated higher than Jacob James, Trey LaRue. But another big body that is the 5th offensive lineman. We'll consider Paris Johnson still in, and things are looking better and better for that on that front. So the 5th guy, the 5th offensive lineman in the class, probably not the last, but always good to steal from Penn State, right?
Right. This is a little bit of you're taking a guy who's in the state of Michigan, so you're taking him away from a Big Ten rival there. He was committed to Penn State, so you're taking him away from a Big Ten team there. So, yeah, I think that is you're getting stronger, and teams you're playing are getting a little weaker. So that is a win-win from the Ohio State perspective. He is. I mean, you mentioned he's a 3-star. which, I know people at this point, after years of Urban Meyer recruiting, everyone looks at 3 stars like, well, what's wrong? Couldn't you get an actual player? Like, why are they taking a 3-star? We have talked in the past about how Ohio State will sort of look at what certain other programs are doing, programs that are good at identifying and developing talent. Grant Toutant had an offer from Michigan State. Michigan State is one of those programs, especially in the offensive line. He also had an offer from Wisconsin. That's another program where, if you have followed Wisconsin football at all in the last 25 years, Wisconsin does a pretty good job identifying and developing offensive line talent. So if those 2 teams are in on him, that's a pretty good indication you're getting a good prospect. He's got good size. He's 6'7", 310 already. That is a prototypical tackle. He has, if you watch his film, he looks like he could absolutely stay outside at the college level. He's going to be a little bit of a developmental project. It'll take, you never expect to see an offensive lineman play as a true freshman. So it's going to be a year, maybe 2 before you see anything out of him. But, the frame is there. He moves his feet pretty well watching his highlights. So, that's absolutely a guy who seems like he'll be a good fit with the program, and then, check back in 2 years and see how he's developing.
And he had been committed for a long time at Penn State and made a business decision. The second commit, I believe he was second, was Ty Hamilton, another 3-star guy, a defensive end out of Pickerington, the brother of Ohio State defensive nose tackle. I was going to say defensive tackle, but he's nose tackle. I'm not saying defensive nose tackle as if there's an offensive nose tackle. Obviously. Ty Hamilton, the brother of Davon Hamilton, a 6'2", 250 D end. And this to me feels like they're in on a lot of good defensive tackles, and whether Darian Henry is a defensive tackle or not, to me, like Ty Hamilton is, and I'll just tell you, he's ranked the number 39 strong side defensive end, number 771 in the nation, number 26 in the state per the 24/7 Sports Composite. To me, this feels like an offer because they're not in on a lot of edge guys. And when I say like an edge guy, I'm talking more of a Chase Young pass rusher rather than like a Darian Henry, like I said. So this to me feels like they're not in on a lot of those guys. They've got a guy in Ty Hamilton in their backyard or in their side yard, I guess it would be. But he's got offers from Penn State. I think was he at? I have an offer from Michigan as I click on his profile here. But had good offers. Yeah, offer from Michigan, offer from Michigan State, Purdue. So to me, this was he's right here. We're not in on a lot of other guys. Let's just go ahead and see what he does at camp. They like him. They'll offer him, which they did. He, commits shortly thereafter. Tom, I wonder, do you think, and we know Ryan Day has said he's going to up the focus on Ohio. I feel like this is an offer that Urban Meyer doesn't make until like a week or 2 before the December signing day.
Maybe, but you have to also remember that because he's Devon Hamilton's younger brother, he has probably spent a lot more time around Larry Johnson the last few years than most other defensive line prospects. And at this point, if Larry Johnson says, I want that guy, I think Larry Johnson probably has the cachet within the program that people are going to go, yeah, okay, he's been right about the last 47 guys he said he'd wanted. So that's always kind of turned out well when Larry Johnson wants a guy. So if Larry Johnson says he wants a guy, I would guess that is a pretty good leading indicator that the guy is probably going to be a pretty good prospect. Hamilton's an interesting player. He reminds me just build wise and how he plays. He's maybe a little bit like Jashawn Cornell, where he could be a defensive end. He could be like a 3-tech defensive tackle, and they could slot him in one of those two places. And, that may be see how his body develops and see, if they want to, you can certainly bulk him up if you want to, or keep him a little more lean and try and play him outside. In high school with Pickerington Central, He plays standing up. He plays with his hand in the dirt, rushing off the edge. They put him inside. He's kind of all over the place. So he's a little bit of a, multiple choice defensive lineman where you could do a couple different things with him and, get him on campus, see how he develops, see what spot he fits best or what spot you really end up having a need, and then slot him in there. But for someone that has had as much time with Larry Johnson as he has, and as much face time, as much time just around the program, knowing what's going on, I think that's probably a reasonably safe bet for them that you're going to get. You don't know exactly what you're going to get, but you're going to get something pretty good. He's actually ranked higher than Devon Hamilton was when he was a recruit. So, and Devon Hamilton has turned out pretty darn well. So I think that's a chance they're going to be willing to take.
Yeah, they'll have 3 years out of Devon Hamilton in the rotation, and I think that's about all you can reasonably expect or hope for from a defensive lineman. Because if he's in the rotation as a true freshman, you're probably losing him as a junior. And, if he gets tested a red shirt, then, you still might only get 3 years out of him. And if he's a little bit of a late bloomer like Devon Hamilton, where he's not really in a lineup until he's a redshirt sophomore, that's fine as well, because those guys tend to stick around until their fifth year anyway. So if he follows that trend, that'll be just fine. And like you said, he's familiar with the program. So he's one of those guys that can hit the ground running. Plus he's a local kid, so there's not going to be the homesickness. And I guess the intangibles make this an easier offer as well. And like you said, he's familiar with everything. They don't have to indoctrinate him into, Coach Mick. I'm sure they all know each other very well. And then you go from the winter when he arrives, if he's going to arrive early or whatever. So yeah, it's and it goes back to what you were saying about the other schools that can develop and see talent. Michigan State liked him. They do pretty well with those defensive ends, as we've seen. The two biggest, I guess, commitments begin with Jaden Ballard, the 2021 wide receiver from Massillon, who, if you watch his film, the only way to tell the difference between him and Devin Smith from back in the day is Devin Smith didn't have long hair flowing out of his, or floofing out of his helmet. Other than that, they are almost identical. They both wear 9. They both are routinely catching deep passes with, like secretariat-like distances between themselves and defensive backs. It also reminded me of Chris Olave, his film from last year, where there's nobody in the picture, and that when you see stuff like that, you really tend to doubt the competition. But I there's also these guys are also talented. That's why they're making other players look bad. But he's the number 21 receiver in the 2021 class, number 5 player in Ohio, number 120 player overall. And Tom, the 2021 Ohio class is pretty darn good. And Jack Sawyer, the defensive end, 5-star defensive end, was the first commitment. They added Kyle McCord, the quarterback out of Pennsylvania, out of Philadelphia. And then Jaden Ballard is the third 2021 commit. But there's, I think everybody's waiting for Lorenzo Styles Jr., the other receiver, to pull the trigger and become a part of the class. But Ballard is one of the top receivers in the nation and looks like an ideal fit. I'm assuming at Z for the Buckeyes down the road, add some weight, and he'll, I'm not saying Devin Smith, because that kind of deep threat is, I don't think we'll ever see it again, but they look remarkably similar.
You're not saying Devin Smith, but literally 2 minutes ago you said Devin Smith. So
I'm not saying it. I'm just saying.
He is someone who, scouting. There's an old baseball cliche about not scouting the stat line and not looking at guys' minor league stats and just projecting them to the major leagues, because there's all sorts of adjustments you have to make between levels and that sort of thing. There's a little bit of that in high school ball, where you have to you can't just look at the numbers and automatically assume, okay, well, he's going to do that at college too. But to put up the numbers he has, last year it was 36 catches for 851 yards, and I'm not going to do the math exactly, but that's north of 20 yards per reception. 12 touchdowns on 36 receptions. Those are all pretty good. What's more telling to me is that's a sophomore doing that at a program as big as Massillon. Massillon is one of the biggest, most famed, most storied programs in the state of Ohio. If you are not just playing as a sophomore, but leading the team in receptions as a sophomore on a team that goes to the state championship game, that tells you something. That tells you that, yes, even on a team that's got a whole lot of talent, Massillon always gives, puts a handful of kids into Division I basically every year. To be a sophomore on a program like that and be that kind of an impact player on a state championship game team, that is pretty telling. And, he's someone who he runs, the times he runs when they do like a pro day kind of thing, the times are kind of match the on-field performance. It all kind of makes sense. Like, yes, he's fast out of pads. He's fast in pads. He's an impact player on the field. That is someone that, there's the 2020 recruiting class at wide receiver for Ohio State is just completely bananas. And
we'll get to
there's
that.
a lot. Yeah, there's a lot to talk about there. We still haven't even seen the 2019 recruiting class and Garrett Wilson on the field for a meaningful snap yet. So you've got that to look forward to. But a couple years from now, that Jaden Ballard is someone that you are going to want to kind of. He's someone that if he enrolls early, he will be someone you're gonna be looking for at the spring game for sure.
I believe he had a teammate, Trayvon Morgan. I believe that was his name. First team All-State wide receiver as well. I'll be interested to see how his performance adjusts to not having him there. And Tom, you remember when Alvin Harper left the Cowboys and signed with the Buccaneers, and he was a really great deep threat number 2, but did not transition into a number 1 with the Bucs. This is timely football, only 20 years ago or whatever, but it's always interesting to see how these guys just adjust to not having somebody on the other side. And so if his numbers dip or if they don't, just we'll see how that goes. The biggest commit, I guess, the highest ranked commit of the last week was 4-star cornerback Clark Phillips out of La Habra, California. He's the third highest ranked member of the class right now for the Buckeyes, the number 4 corner overall, number 46 player, 5'10" and a half listed, 178 pounds, not the biggest guy, but like we said with Tate Martell, when you've got these smaller guys who are rated highly, don't overlook, don't dismiss them. Those are the guys that I'm assuming, and from what you watch the highlights, like he shows up. He's a physical guy. He doesn't play like some small dude. And obviously, he's quick and he's fast. And as multiple as offenses are anymore, there will always be a place for those 6'1" long corners, but there's also going to be a place for the guys who can cover the slots and can go from outside to inside. Like we keep waiting for Marcus Williamson at Ohio State. He's this is a similar mold where you've got a guy that is not the biggest guy, but he's aggressive, he's physical, and I don't even know that he plays bigger than his size. He plays his size and just defends well. And that's him and legend Cavazos. If Cavazos does end up being a corner, that's 2 pretty good guys right there. I think obviously they still need to add some more defensive backs, especially if, with the bullet position. I know Court Williams, we'll talk about the linebackers in a little bit, has talked about the bullet position. I don't see that going to a linebacker recruit very often. And that's to me, that's a safety that will have to play bigger. And that's always safer to me than a linebacker playing smaller. There are very few C. Grants out there. But Clark Phillips, Tom, a good start or a good finish. Maybe they're taking 2 corners and then they've got some safeties, obviously, they're looking at. But when you looked at this 2020 cornerbacks class, we talked a long time, many months, about how deep it was and how many names the Buckeyes were in on. Phillips didn't really come into the picture until a few months ago, maybe a couple of months ago, but once he got into the picture, it was pretty clear, pretty quick that he and the Buckeyes clicked.
Well, you can't ever assume they're going to just waltz over to California and grab a kid who's got offers from basically everywhere in the country, and Phillips does. That's not an easy sell necessarily to pull a kid from California. I mean, they've done a very nice job doing that recently. You've gotten Wyatt Davis, you gotten Chris Olave, they just got J.P. Andrade, the walk-on quarterback from California. They have had some success over there, but that's like one player a year. That's not, you're not bringing in 5 to 6 players there every year. So that's not a place you're just going to assume they're going to pull a ton of talent out of. But you're right. I mean, it was that recruitment went 0 to 60 pretty quickly, because he was not someone who last fall, I think, was on a lot of people's radars for Ohio State. Corner is probably the single biggest position of need for them in 2020. Because remember, last year they didn't get a corner in that 2019 class. They had Jordan Battle committed, and then he flipped to Alabama on signing day. So that is kind of the biggest hole, I think, on the team right now, that if you have an empty class in 2019, you're potentially losing Jeff Okudah to the NFL after this year. You're losing Damon Arnett to the NFL after this year. Shaun Wade could go. That Shaun Wade is eligible to go to the draft if he has a good year. That's a possibility. So then you've got to replace those guys, and they have names on the roster. They've got guys who they have, brought in, Cam Brown and Sevin Banks and all those guys, and Tyreek Johnson. Those guys are all out there and are all, possible next man up kind of guys. But you've got to have the guys behind them, and without having a guy in the 2019 class, that makes that 2020 class a big deal to kind of restock that cupboard. Because if you have that, was it 2017 that they got Okudah and Wade, and it was the number 1 and number 2 corners in the country? Yeah. Like, that's not going to happen very often. But if that happens, that sets you up for some big success. If you have a couple good corners in a class, and you can have, you give them a year to sort of learn, and then you've got them for a couple of years, and potentially that third year they take that kind of Denzel Ward step or the Marshawn Lattimore step, or whichever corner you want to use as your example. That's that, and you just need 1 or 2 of those guys on your team, and that makes your defense a lot more effective. So that is a major position of need for them this year. And between Phillips and Cavazos, it sure seems like they are off to a remarkably good start there right now, which did not look like it was necessarily the case a couple months ago.
You remember how Kendall Sheffield was thought by many to be a one and done guy when he came in? I think Ohio State, we're talking about, it's a position of need. I think they will have that one and done guy next year in Shaun Wade. You mentioned he was the number 2 corner. He has yet to really play corner at Ohio State fully. And so when we're looking at who they're going to sign this year, if it's not as many as you would like, don't forget that could be Shaun Wade next year. And if it is, I think you'll be okay. And if he ends up leaving early after his 4th season, that's a sacrifice you should be willing to make. So that, at least it gives them room. While they do need some more corners, because some of those will be safeties and some of those will be bullets, they do have that guy waiting in the wings. And that's something that not many teams have, where you can just be like, it's like a September call-up, except, it's football, and he's probably really good. So the next commitment, Tom, will maybe be Darian Henry, who is announcing on Saturday, who the Cincinnati Princeton defensive lineman. I think Rivals has him as the strong side defensive end, top 50 player, I believe, in their rankings. 24/7 has him as a defensive tackle, the number 11 defensive tackle in the nation, the number 121 ranked player, number 2 player in the state, 6'4.5", 279. Everybody expects him to be a Buckeye. He went through his spring visits in the South, the SEC, and Paris Johnson was along with him for some of those. Jaheim Thomas, the linebacker, who looks like he won't be a Buckeye, but Darian Henry, by most accounts, all accounts, every single crystal ball projection, should be committing to the Buckeyes on Saturday. I'm not sure if he's going to be doing that. I don't know if that's taking place in Atlanta at the Rivals Challenge going on right now. I don't know if that lasts all week. Perhaps I should have researched a little bit better on where he will be committing. But the date and the school that he will end up at, that's the most important information. And so that could be, and it wouldn't be a huge surprise if somebody commits before then, based on all of the buzz and the intel. But we know for certain that Darian Henry is going to commit on Saturday, and we have a pretty good idea that it will be Ohio State, and that will give them another guy on the defensive line in this class. And more importantly, maybe, Tom, it continues to lock down Ohio.
It continues to lock down Ohio, and it helps you keep Paris Johnson in the class. I mean, I think the general trend with Paris Johnson has been for a month or two that things are kind of trending back in the right direction for Ohio State. He and Darian Henry are very close. Getting Darian Henry in the class can only help with keeping Paris Johnson in the class. If there's any lingering concern about that, I think that will help with that as well. But, you need to keep that defensive line well stocked. And they have kind of loaded up on that defensive line in recent years. And they have a ton of defensive ends that they brought in the last couple of years. They had, you got Zach Harrison last year, you've got Jack Sawyer next year. So, if they're not loading at defensive end this year, that's okay. But you need to keep the middle of that line stocked too, because that is a spot where if you are just a little bit thin, that can just completely submarine your season. And if you want to see an example of that, I think you might be able to see one this fall in Ann Arbor, because there's a whole lot of pieces there, except they're real, real thin at that defensive tackle spot. And that is, that's like the baseball team that hits and pitches really well, but they play crappy defense. Yep. And, those hits fall in, and all of a sudden that means your pitchers aren't as good. And if you've got great corners and you've got great safeties, and that's all great, but the opposing team can run for 5 yards up the gut every time, yep, that's great. You've got a great defense, and you're losing a bunch of football games. So that's a spot that Ohio State has in the past been a little thin. They went through a period when all those Clemson guys were going through, I think let's see, Dexter Lawrence and who else? All those guys who went to Clemson, who Ohio State was kind of, Christian Wilkins, who Ohio State was in on, and they didn't get any of them. That was 2016, right? 2015, 16, thereabouts. Yeah.
Antoine Jackson went to Auburn.
Yeah, went to Auburn. Yep. They missed out on a whole bunch of guys, and it was like, oh boy, that could be a big problem. And then they have kind of righted the ship and brought in, the Tommy Togiai class and all of those guys, and it's fine now. And this just kind of keeps that cupboard well stocked on the inside of that line.
Yeah, and as we've seen, they'll just keep bringing in defensive linemen. They'll just keep stocking up on those defensive tackles because they don't want to be thin there ever again. And it will be interesting to watch Michigan. Devin Bush wouldn't have looked as good last year if he would have had blockers on him, getting through the defensive line, not being occupied. And if you don't have those guys up front, those two guys up front, it's going to make the guys behind them look really ordinary. And we've seen some ordinary linebacker play at Ohio State of late. I'm not going to put that on defensive line. We are always going to put that on the coaches. Right, Tom? Right on the coaches.
But that's only because it's their fault. That's the only reason.
And because they don't listen to the show.
Yeah, well, except for Ryan Day.
Well, no,
Ryan Day for the defense.
The coaches, the coaches that are gone, they've got other podcasts to listen to.
Greg Schiano left to spend more time with his family and also to listen to this podcast.
Oh, you know what? Now he does have. Although, hey, I'm the one who said he had plenty of time, too much time on his hands in the past. Maybe he should have put some of that time into listening to the show.
What would improve the team the most? More insight from us.
Well, I'm not saying it would hurt, but the reason I said putting the defense around Ohio or keeping the Ohio guys at home is because it's looking. Let's talk about the running back situation a little bit. It's looking like they're gonna possibly miss out on the two best running backs in Ohio in the 2020 cycle in Diamante Trianum at Akron-Hoban and Michael Drennan here in Columbus at Dublin Kaufman. I should have looked, but
yes, Dublin Kaufman.
Trianum is looking like an Arizona State lean because they are letting him. They said you can play running back, and he's an all-state linebacker. And if you watch his videos, you watch his highlights, he looks like a very good running back. But he is also a very, very intriguing defensive prospect and a guy that when you talk about Ohio State's bullet position, it's like this is the guy that is made for that position. Last year we were talking about Massillon's receivers. Trianum, played linebacker and played safety. In the playoffs against Massillon, they put him at corner against Jaden Ballard, who's a 6'3" guy. And I believe his name is Trayvon Morgan, who's like a 6'6" guy. And Trianum is, 5'11", 215, 220 pound, boulder, running stride for stride and making plays on the ball. But he wants to be a running back. And the fact that Ohio State is not telling him, yes, you will definitely be a running back, when they're looking to bring in two running backs, tells me that, one, we know they feel things are going very, very well with Bijan Robinson, the 5-star guy out of Arizona. But it also tells me it's going very well somewhere else because right now, Trianum isn't even their number 2 guy. And Michael Drennan, I checked with some people today, and right now I don't know that there's no communication with Ohio State, but they don't know where things stand. They just assume that Ohio State likes several players better. But with Trianum not even being the top 2 guys, Ohio State has to feel really, really good about their situation with more than just Robinson. If they are not slow playing him, but just not telling him what he wants to hear. They're telling him where they think he will end up, which is kudos to Ohio State for not just telling him what he wants to hear and then getting him here and then moving him over. I know Jim Tressel back in the day had to explain. Was it Prescott Burgess back in the 2002 2003 class where he wanted to play safety, 5-star safety, but he was like 6'2", 230. And you knew he wasn't going to play safety. Ohio State was telling him linebacker. Lloyd Carr's like, yeah, we'll let you play safety. I think by his second day, he was at linebacker. So, they're telling Trianum, linebacker, which means, Tom, we don't know who that second guy is, or there's been so many. Since we last talked to you guys, a lot has happened at running back. And, Kendall Milton has been here, been a lean, been gone. Now he's out of the picture to Georgia, perhaps. But it would seem that things are settling in on 2 guys that they really, really like, really feel comfortable about, and like well enough to let somebody leave the state and not latch onto them right now.
This is kind of the inverse of the old don't look at what commits are saying, look at what they're doing. Like, don't pay attention to their social media where they're kind of batting their eyes at 6 different fan bases. Look at where they're visiting. Look at what they're doing. Look at where there's communication. This is kind of the corollary to that, where don't necessarily look at this as 2 running backs are leaving the state. If Ohio State is really comfortable enough to tell him, look, we don't think you're going to play running back, and not, they are basically willing to write him off as a running back and write him off as a prospect if he's not willing to come play linebacker, that should be a pretty good indication that they truly, in their heart of hearts, believe they have two running backs that they are going to end up with who they are very comfortable with in terms of skill level, who they think are good fits, and that should be pretty comforting to you. I think we could probably make a decent guess as to who those two people are, right. But if they are willing to tell him, they're not going to play the game and they're not going to, kind of tell him what he wants to hear. That's admirable, and I'm sure that there are a lot of places that don't do that. But that's, that may be disappointing to Trey Adams if that's where he wanted to play running back at Ohio State. If that's the case, then I'm sure that's disappointing. That's not where he's ending up. But, if you get a guy on campus, if you do whatever you need to do to get him on campus, and then everything changes immediately, a lot of times that can create, bad vibes in that locker room, disappointment in the locker room. If you're the second day there, you're feeling like, hey, they lied to me to get me here. That does not really set you up for long-term success. So, and if he wants to play running back, Arizona State that's a great destination. There is, there is a part of me that going back, you hear a lot of fun things about going to school at Arizona State. So I don't think that would be the worst place to end up.
Such as?
Such as, it's nice all the time, and I think I get the sense that a lot of people spend a lot of time at the pool and that kind of thing.
Like I could relate it, like for those people who have gone to Ohio State, like the first really great day on the Oval is probably like that every single day at Arizona State.
It's, I think, a desirable location as long as the air conditioning is working. I think that's there are a lot of things that make that a desirable location. And I think that there was a lot of kind of scoffing at the Herm Edwards thing when he took that job, and I will raise my hand and admit that I thought that's going to be kind of a weird fit. And so far they looked pretty decent last year, and they seem like they're recruiting pretty well. And maybe it is not a traditional hire, but the Herm Edwards hire seems like it's going a whole lot better than the Lovie Smith hire. So that's that is, if you are going to go out of state, I think Arizona State that is a perfectly defensible decision to make.
And I tweeted this out this week, but this is just from following recruiting. I'm seeing Arizona State more and more in terms of their name, just mentioned with recruits that are also looking at Ohio State. And Tom, there's maybe I'm trying to think who all have, while we've been following recruiting for all of these years, how often do Arizona State and Ohio State co-mingle in terms of, these are my 5 schools, and I don't, maybe Christian Kirk, because he was from Arizona, I think maybe that was, I'm just assuming he was involved in Arizona State and that he was also from Arizona because that's what my memory does to me. But these two schools don't fly in the same circles. And now not only do you have Trey Adams looking at Arizona State, and Joe Royer, tight end, as is looking there. I believe Mike Drennan has maybe taken a visit there, or is definitely interested in it. And it's been impressive the way they have gone about this. And it's not just Herm Edwards. He's put some interesting staff together, and I never had a problem with it because with the hire, because I've deleted all of my tweets saying that I did. So forks up out there out west, Tom.
It does seem like Ohio State is recruiting the West Coast a little harder than they have in the past. I mean, we just talked about them recruiting in California a little bit.
Arizona.
Yeah, Washington, Arizona. The quarterback for 2020, Jack Miller, is from Arizona. They had Darvon Hubbard, a running back from Arizona, committed for a while this cycle. So that has been a region that is a region that is rich with talent and rich with, especially with skill position talent. And so that's, if you're not going into Florida to get those guys, the Southwest and California, I mean, that's a pretty good region to go get those guys. And if you are out there, then you're gonna bump into guys in Arizona State polos and a lot of those high schools. So I think that probably explains some of that overlap.
Some of the other running backs, like Zachary Evans, the 5-star number 1 running back in the nation, put Ohio State in his top 5 a few weeks ago, and that created some buzz because Ohio State people were like, what, okay. And then like last week, it was reported that he was going to be taking a visit to Ohio State. It was first thought to be an official visit, but then it's like, no, it's an unofficial visit, and you're like, whoa, that's serious because he's going to pay his own way. But apparently he no-showed. So then it's like, well, maybe that's why he was going to go unofficial, because he knew, like, if I don't want to go, I'm not going to put too much effort into it. They may still get him on campus for an official, but it's a long shot, and I'm sure he's not the other running back that they're thinking of. If we're assuming Bijan Robinson is one of those guys that they feel really good about, and they do feel really good about it, and things have gotten better and better, and you see pictures of them in Atlanta this week at the Rivals 5-Star Challenge, and him and Jack Miller are next to each other. They're always together. There was a picture today of them with 5-star defensive lineman Brian Bressie, who committed to Clemson, and Jack Miller talked to him a year ago at Friday Night Lights, and he talked about the recruiting that he is doing on different guys. His recruitment of people has not stopped, and it's only picked up, and Robinson is one of his top targets, and it appears that things are paying off there. Sam Adams, G. Scott's teammate out at Washington, 4-star running back, was in on an official visit as well. Blake Corum out of Maryland was there a couple weeks ago. He's a 4-star guy, probably down the list some. Emmitt Smith's son, E.J. Smith, put Ohio State in his top 5 recently. He might be like an ideal H-back, like an old school Urban Meyer H-back, running back and receiver who can do it all. Jalen Knighton, the 4-star kid out of Florida, is like 5'10", 5'11", 180. But he appears to be a guy that a lot of the recruitniks are thinking could be that second guy in this class. And it would make some sense that he's similar to Michael Drennan in that he could be considered maybe a slot receiver. He's the quote unquote all-purpose back that they like to throw in there, where he could be a receiver, he could be a running back. But I think Ryan Day is looking at these guys as running backs now, and it would appear he has a couple of guys rated ahead of Drennan. Jalen Knighton might be that second guy. When you say 5'10", 180 pounds out of Florida, other than thinking of Maurice Wells, you think of everybody you think of what we thought Maurice Wells was when Bill Connolly signed him. This dynamic jitterbug type of guy, speed on speed, and I think Jalen Knighton is more in that realm than what we thought we were getting from Maurice Wells. So if it's Bijan Robinson and Jalen Knighton, that's not a bad haul. People are going to wonder, though, Robinson is 200, Knighton is like 180. Where are the bigger backs? And that's where, Tom, you and I would point to the last class, and also the fact that your quarterback is 230 pounds.
Right. You don't have to have a 235-pound running back every year. Like they are perfectly capable of, a 200-pound running back can run between the tackles. This is J.K. Dobbins is not like fullback sized. He is, I think he said he plays around 208 or 210 or something like that. And if you're coming in at 200 pounds, give Coach Mick 6 months to work with you, and you'll probably be up around 205, 210. That is a perfectly fine size to run between the tackles in the Big Ten. Don't do that with Maurice Wells. Don't do that with your 175-pound guy. Those are two different running back roles. And if you have one of each, that's like you said, that's a pretty good haul. If you have the J.K. Dobbins type running back and the DeMario McCall type running back, those are good complementary pieces that can do a couple different things and threaten defenses in a few different ways. And that would be if it does end up being Knighton and Robinson, I would say that would be a pretty big win for the coaching staff this year.
Another thing to keep in mind, Ezekiel Elliott was at one point an all-purpose back, listed at like 6 foot 190, and now I believe he's 230-pound running back in the NFL, and he was 225 at Ohio State. So if they have the frame, they'll put it on them. And you got Marcus Crowley in this class, along with Steel Chambers, where these are Marcus Crowley did not, and we talked about this in the past, did not look like the biggest back, but they call him a big back. And I think he's another guy that he has the frame to handle more weight. But so that's the running back situation. And it appeared for a while that things were going to be iffy and that they would have to, fall back on the Ohio kids. And not having to do that, things are going well for the running backs. Now, even as well as things are going at running back, it pales in comparison to the way things are going at wide receiver now, when you've got 3 commitments in Julian Fleming, who we haven't yet really talked about, but we've got time. We'll eventually get around to talking about him 20 or 30 times. Number 1 receiver in the class.
We really talked about him a couple times before that, about, hey, he's got an announcement coming.
That's
hey,
right.
It's probably going to be Ohio State. So we've kind of already had this conversation.
Yes, we have. And then you've got G. Scott and you've got Jackson Smith and Jigba as they're all 3 top 100 guys. A tremendous class if you just stop right there. Tom, one of the most amazing things, and you mentioned Garrett Wilson and Jameson Williams earlier, the fact that we have almost forgotten about Garrett Wilson in all of this, because, wow, this class is amazing, and there's more to come, which we'll talk about. But when you mentioned Garrett Wilson, I'm like, oh yeah, like there's still the 2019 kids that we've only seen glimpses of. And, these 2020 kids have overshadowed Garrett Wilson, and Garrett Wilson has overshadowed Jameson Williams. And when you look at highlights of Jameson Williams, you're like, how could anybody overshadow Ted Ginn Jr.? But these 2020 kids are it's already a stellar class. They could be adding, they're still looking for that true slot guy. Jackson Smith and Jigba could be outside, inside. I think when I first saw his highlights, to me, he was KJ Hill with some more, with a little bit more speed. So he can go inside, outside. They're still looking for that true slot Rondale Moore type. And right now they might be zeroing in on Mookie Cooper, who's a top 100 guy out of St. Louis, would actually be, if he were to commit eventually, would be the number 2 receiver in OSU's class. Not the number 2 receiver overall, but the second highest ranked guy. And Tom, I'm thinking if they got those 4 guys, and I'm throwing this on you without any time to prepare, but what other positional classes would this compare to? I go back to the Brew Crew of like Michael Brewster, Mike Adams, and J.B. Shugarts in 2008. They missed out on a guy from West Virginia that would have made it even better. I go back to the linebacker class of 2002 with DeAndrea, Bobby Carpenter, A.J. Hawk, Stan White, and Mike Kudla was a linebacker ranked for a while before they rewound history and called him a defensive end. But classes like that where almost legendary in OSU lore, but obviously we still have to get there. But in terms of a wow positional class, they're on the cusp.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to like the first Urban Meyer class where he just pulled like 4 top 100 defensive linemen out of thin air in the last month of he took the job in early December, and it was just like, and now just pulled the tablecloth and then all of a sudden, ta-da! Here's Noah Spence and Adolphus Washington and Tommy Shutt and
Pittman.
Who else? Savon Pittman. Yeah. I mean that was a pretty good. That was like college football recruiting, the prestige. Ta-da! Yeah, there were. Let's see. I guess a lot of the ones I'm thinking about were guys who committed on the same day, and like Von Bell committed on the same day as someone else, I think. But yeah, there were a lot of kind of like the 10-star Saturday kind of things. But yeah, I mean, in terms of a just positional unit in one recruiting class, that if they get that group of 4 guys, that is like, I mean, with the depth that they have, you get into we don't have enough footballs to throw to all these incredibly talented playmakers. Like that's the problem you have. And in terms of problems to have as a college football program, that is a pretty good problem to have. And there's those guys are, if they are that fast, those guys are all special teams assassins for their freshman year, and you can squeeze some guys into be kick returners and that kind of stuff. I mean, I think that I might have honestly not mentioned Jamison Williams earlier when we were talking about wide receivers. And I mean, like you said, Jamison Williams has been overshadowed by Garrett Wilson, who is now being overshadowed by the 2020 wide receivers, who, if they can continue to build if they add Lorenzo Styles for 2021 and you add him to Jaden Ballard, like all of a sudden the 2021 start to overshadow the 2020s. Marvin Harrison Jr., he's a, I think, top 50 or top 60 guy in the 2021 class. I mean, they could very easily have like 10 wide receivers on the roster in 2021, all of whom were top 100 overall players in the nation at one position group. Like that is just absurd. And that's the kind of stuff that it makes you wonder how long Brian Hartline is going to be here, because Brian Hartline is very obviously a wizard of some sort in terms of recruiting and coaching and development and all that. So that is about the only thing that is a little bit of a caveat there, is how long will this last if Brian Hartline goes, and will they be able to replace him? Because there is some history in Ohio State football in the relatively recent past of less than stellar wide receiver coaching. So, the question is always how well will the next guy do? But right now, boy, it could not be going much better at that wide receiver position.
No, to wonder how it could go better is like, just keep your fan fiction to yourself. All right. Just stick to reality. When people try to the what if they sign all of these top guys, and it's like, well, this might be one of those what ifs that actually happened. And which takes us to the tight end situation where they brought in 3 official visits this weekend. They're obviously zeroed in on Joe Royer, is the guy that from Cincinnati Elder, who they basically had him and Luke Lachey competing for a spot, or competing for an offer at camp a few weeks ago, and they extended the offer to Royer. He, interestingly, not too long after that, in 24/7's own rankings, got bumped up to like the number 3 tight end in the nation and the number 2 player in Ohio. But in the composite, he's a 3-star guy, 6'5", 225, but he looks like he will be a Buckeye sooner rather than later. But he's not likely to be the only tight end that they want to bring in, which is why they've brought in quite a few others. But this goes back, Tom, to me where the running back situation, because you have Luke Lachey there in Grandview, and stone's throw from Ohio Stadium, a Buckeye legacy. His dad is
Jim Lachey.
Yeah, his first name just escaped me, and I apologize. But yeah, his dad is Jim Lachey. So it would seem like if you wanted him, you'd simply have to, here's your offer, here's where you can sign, and it would be done. But rather than do that, they're only going to bring in one, which I don't think is the case, or they feel good about other guys, or Tom, they feel like this is a situation where they can really, really, really slow play a guy because they know how much he would like to be a Buckeye. But that can also tick off not only the player, but the family. And when he does have, like Luke Lachey's got prominent offers, and right now he's crystal balled 100% to Iowa, which is where every tight end wants to go. I mean, that's TEU, but he's also got Michigan State, Wisconsin, Cincinnati offers. But I think if they let him go and he commits, like I don't know that he would come crawling back when they come crawling back to him. So it feels like this is another situation where they like their options. They not just like them, but they feel really good about their options elsewhere.
They certainly like their options better, probably, I think. It may also be a case where if you offer Luke Lachey, there's probably about a 97% chance that he commits in 15 minutes or less. That's not a guarantee, and that's not I have not spoken to Luke Lachey. That is not coming from Luke Lachey. But if you live in Grandview, which is literally right across the Olentangy River from Ohio State, if you're not familiar with Columbus, his dad is not only a Ohio State football legend, an offensive lineman under Earl Bruce in the early 80s, who went on to play for the Washington Redskins for a number of years. He's also the color guy on the Ohio State Football Radio Network. So, like, if you were to draw up basically the family that would most want their kid to play for Ohio State, that might be what that family looked like. So, I don't know if he left and went to go to Iowa. Would Jim Lachey then stop doing the radio because he would be going to Iowa games every Saturday? I don't know. And if Luke Lachey had an Ohio State offer and could go play at Ohio State, I would have to think that would be a pretty appealing thing. So they may be just kind of trying to string it out a little bit and see. Cam Large was here last weekend. He's from Massachusetts. I think there's a sense that has some legitimate interest in Ohio State, and Ohio State has some legitimate interest in him. So maybe it doesn't work out with Lachey, but if you were to draw up the profile of someone that Ohio State thought they might be able to slow play in state, it would probably look a lot like Luke Lachey.
Yeah, and I was watching Joe Royer highlights. He's similar to Jeremy Rucker in that he doesn't really play tight end. He plays mostly receiver, which there's going to be a learning curve there. But somebody going to Iowa where nobody goes to Iowa expecting to play right away anyway, and it wouldn't be the first Buckeye legacy to go to Iowa. There was James Daniels, center, high school All-American center, son of former Buckeye LaShawn Daniels, but LaShawn Daniels Jr. went to Iowa running back. He didn't have an Ohio State offer, but there's a history there of Iowa, stealing former Buckeyes kids. I don't want to say stealing. It's that's not proper. Taking them against their will, I think, would be a better way. But no, so it wouldn't be the first guy to leave that Ohio State legacy for a situation they felt better about. And if there's no offer, you're not going to walk on. But yeah, you like you said, this is what it would look like if there was a player they thought they could take their time on and come back around to. And the heart wants what the heart wants, and we'll see how that situation turns out. The defensive line we've talked a little bit about. Like I said, there's not a lot of defense, not a lot of edge rushers out there. They had 3 defensive tackles on campus recently. Strong side defensive ends, defensive tackles, 4, including Darian Henry. But we'll see how. There's still a lot of time. But these official visits move everything up so quickly because Ohio State, they'll let you do the spring official visits if they think you're going to make like a summer decision or a decision before your school year. I know. Do you know, is Dabo still staunchly against spring visits, official visits, and doesn't do them?
I don't know, honestly. Dabo has not been talking about a whole bunch of stuff recently, so I'm not sure where he stands on that or any of several other topics of possible interest.
It's best for him to just stay quiet right now and refer any questions to the SIDs or the attorneys. The linebackers, I think, is more interesting than the defensive line right now because there's could be some movement. They had Court Williams, a 4-star linebacker out of California, on campus, and Cody Simon, 4-star linebacker out of New Jersey.
Yes.
Yeah. And they're almost the same guy. Like, if you look at them listed, like, one's like 6'1", 216, the other's 6'1", 218. One runs a 4.60, the other runs a 4.62. So they're these fast linebackers that is popular in football right now. And like I said, Court Williams has said, he likes the idea of playing the bullet position. And that's fine if that's what you want to come to Ohio State to play. You have to be able to play safety when you do that. And Ohio State doesn't go out and get linebackers to play safety. When I, before we saw this spring football with Ohio State, I would think, yeah, okay, you could put a linebacker there. But when you saw everything that Brendan White had to do in practice, and you saw him, if you watched the spring game, the two bullets were Brendan White and Jocelyn Wint, and they never played linebacker. They were always at safety. So you go ahead and, not you, Tom, but the listeners out there can go ahead and research the last high school linebacker to, that was listed as a linebacker to then become a safety at Ohio State. And it's not going to be a very long list. It's not going to be a very recent list. It doesn't happen. And yes, this is a hybrid position, but the fact that it requires some safety play means that you better have somebody who can play safety there. And you don't need as many linebackers anymore because of that bullet. You don't need to recruit as many per se, but I see Williams as a linebacker. Cody Simon he'll start out. I think he said that they're telling him middle linebacker, or there's been some mention of that. He, being as small as he is, he could start out at will and maybe grow into a middle linebacker. Those two positions are interchangeable. But Tom, for me, I really, if you've watched any of these guys' highlights, they are modern day linebackers. They're like what you see in the NFL draft, where I think a lot of the guys getting drafted came into college at 6'1", 215, 218 pounds, and they grow into fast 240 pounders.
Right. The general trend in football in a lot of positions is basically take a guy who's fast, and then you can make him add some good weight and if you can keep that speed, then you're really dangerous. I mean, you talked about linebackers not moving to safety. There was not that long ago, Ohio State recruited a safety and turned him into a pretty fast defensive end named Sam Hubbard. So that is generally the direction it goes. I mean, they just did that last year with Javonte Jean-Baptiste, who came in as a 210-pound outside linebacker, and then they just fed him food for a year, and now he's a 240-pound defensive end. That is generally the direction that goes. So if you're looking for a hybrid safety linebacker, it's more likely to come from the safeties than it is the linebackers. That's just kind of the direction that generally goes. You bulk up it's easier to add 5 to 10 pounds of muscle to a safety and bulk them up a little more than it is to take a linebacker and keep him just as strong and also make him faster. Like that's a tough spot to be in, and that's there were a lot of times last year that Ohio State had linebackers covering people in space, which is something you're going to have to do in that bullet position, and it was like, it's not great. That's not really what they want to do there. So, yeah, I think you're right. The Jocelyn Wint, Brendan White type player is more likely to end up at that bullet position than one of those linebackers.
Yeah, and Jocelyn Wint is a guy who played some linebacker at Erasmus Hall, but he was also 5'11", 190. He's a safety playing linebacker in that kind of defense, and also played some safety. But if Court Williams can do that, then, man, you've got yourself a prospect. If he's a linebacker that covers like a safety, that's great. I think that's a little bit too much to ask, and unless maybe they wouldn't ask every bullet to do what they ask Brendan White, and that would make sense. You're only going to ask them to do what they can do. You're not going to require, hey, if you're the bullet, then you have to do this, and we know you can't, but we're still going to ask you to do that. That's pretty stupid. And as we know from Greg Madison, he prefers not doing that, and has mentioned that coaches who do that, that's poor coaching. I don't know specifically like who he's talking about. Tom, do you know?
Yeah, whoever it is would benefit from listening to the podcast. I think we can say that for sure.
Oh, I think we could. Mitchell Melton is another guy who had an official visit, 3-star linebacker out of Maryland a couple weeks ago. It's looking like he's headed to Michigan. So we'll see if do they bring in anybody else? Because if they wanted Trayanum, and it looks like they're going to miss out on him, is Simon replacing him? Is Court Williams replacing him? Or will they go out and find a guy? Because like I said, to me, he was a bullet. And they're looking at a number of safeties, which, we could transition to that right now with Lathan Ransom, who is the teammate of Bijan Robinson, I believe Sal Point Catholic in Tucson, who's, top 5 safety, top 100 player, been to Ohio State before, took an official visit, some crystal balls coming in, some rivals predictions coming in his way to Ohio State. So things are looking good there for them. Obviously, that's not going to be the only safety they bring in. They also, or they would sign if he signs with Ohio State. Makari Page, 4-star safety out of Michigan, has been on campus. That seems to me like some say it's Ohio State, Michigan. Others are saying like he's not a take for either of them right now. So we'll see. Maybe the first program to blink, and I don't know. I haven't talked to the kid. I don't know who's going to who is would take him right now or who wouldn't. But he's visited those schools, and the offer is there, and they need bodies and they need talented safeties, and he's one of them. And it gets back to like, well, if they're not going to take him, they must feel good about some other guys. Another Michigan guy, Cameron Martinez. I think he's a 3-star athlete. I believe he plays quarterback, but he's 5'11", like 190. So he's either a slot receiver or a defensive back. They don't really know yet. They just know they like him. So really there's other safeties involved. They had a surprise visit a couple of weeks ago from one of the top safeties in the nation. But it seems like it's going to be maybe a little bit longer before that stuff starts shaking out. Although with Ransom, Tom, taking those official visits, you kind of expect a decision sooner rather than later, and that would be a good start to their safety haul.
Well, he's the top-rated uncommitted safety right now in the nation. He's number 4 in the nation, and the top 3 guys are all committed. So, as far as landing a commitment goes, that is literally the best they could do right now in terms of the rankings. So, and that's another spot where they need to make sure they bring in a couple good players back there. And if Ransom is one of them, that starts you out pretty darn well. Because you've got Legend Cavazos, we talked about, as a corner who theoretically could play safety. He's listed as a safety on the recruiting databases, but he's going to start his career at corner. You got Clark Phillips, who's going to be a corner, true corner. If you can add Ransom to that, that's 3/4 of a very, very, very good defensive backfield already. So, and corner and safety are another spot. They're like defensive tackle, where you want to make sure that cupboard is very well stocked, because there are going to be guys who don't fit schematically, don't develop the way you want to, and you have seen what a year of shaky safety play can look like at Ohio State, and it's not great. So if they can make sure, I mean, they have plenty of talent on the roster right now. I mean, Josh Proctor basically hasn't played, and they absolutely seem to love him by all accounts. And there's plenty of other talented safeties on the roster, but you lose Jordan Fuller after next year. You could lose Sean Wade after next year. I think Brendan White could theoretically turn pro after next year. So you want to make sure you've kind of got that next group of safeties, that next group of corners in place because I think the overall idea is generally you just assume a lot of these guys are going to turn pro at their earliest
convenience,
at the earliest availability. Yes, exactly. Yeah, the earliest convenience. So you gotta make sure you have that next group of when they say next man up, there has to be someone. When they turn and say next man up, there has to be someone standing there who's ready to do it. So that is what this next group is.
Yeah, the other safety they had on campus that I mentioned a couple weeks ago is Chris Thompson out of Texas, the number 7 safety in the nation. Right now, his crystal ball is 100% to Texas. Another guy they were looking at, Jordan Morant out of Bergen Catholic, committed to Michigan, which is not a surprise considering the pipeline there and the history between those two schools. But Morant was a guy who had Ohio State in his top 5 and obviously sided with Michigan. And so when you look down the list of the safeties, it's Makari Page is the next guy out of West Bloomfield, Michigan that we talked about. He's a guy 6'3", 180, 190 pounds that maybe he grows into that bullet because you don't see a lot of 6'3" safeties. And when we say 6'3" high school, that's 6'2" in college, and then maybe 6'1.5" at the combine. But still, maybe you could project him out as that bullet, and then you look at your corners to grow one into a safety, and now you just kind of filter down. It's trickle down secondary economics right there for you. Anything else with the secondary, Tom, that you wanted to touch on? Are we good?
Well, I guess you kind of talked about this a little bit, but in terms of the direction of movement of players, we talked earlier about, safeties turn into linebackers turn into defensive ends, just in terms of the speed. In general, if you have corners who don't work as corners, it's much easier to turn a corner into a safety than the other way around. Turning a safety into a corner is generally an indication that you have a major roster issue. A corner into a safety is not, that can just mean, this guy didn't really work, their, ball skills or whatever. You can turn a corner into a very, very good safety. If you're turning a safety into a corner, that's generally a look at the depth chart and go, something, there's a problem here. So just something else to think about in terms of where some of these guys could fit down the line.
Yeah, that's what other schools do. That's Ohio State doesn't do that because they don't usually have to. That's where other schools where resources are limited, talent does not always pan out one year. You don't get to shop at the same stores as Ohio State. So had to move from safety down to corner. We saw the greatest example of that would be from Ohio State, where you had C. Grant as a starting linebacker had to play corner because you had all kinds of injuries and cornerbacks not panning out for that 2001 team, and played corner about as well as you could ever hope a linebacker to play it. But turning to a linebacker to play corner is something that you never want to see again at Ohio State. And Tom, I'm just going to go out on a limb. You won't ever see it again.
If they keep recruiting the way they're recruiting, I think there's a pretty good chance you will not ever see that again. No. But that was the end of the Cooper era recruiting, and that first year of Tressel, that recruiting was not necessarily there in all of the spots like it is right now.
You mentioned recruiting going on. The 2021 Rivals unveiled their top 100 for 2021. Number 3 was Jack Sawyer, Ohio State defensive end commit. Number 9, Kyle McCord, Ohio State quarterback commit. 2 spots below him, Tom, J.J. McCarthy, Michigan quarterback commit. And I think the 24/7 composite before this, you had McCarthy as a 5-star guy, ranked well ahead of McCord. After camps, I guess Rivals liked McCord better. Tom, did you see the picture of them together, McCarthy and McCord, on Twitter today?
I did. It was it was a little jarring. It's one of those pictures like when you see a guy who ends up at Michigan who made a recruiting visit to Ohio State or vice versa, and you see the picture of them wearing the other team's uniforms, and it's like, oh, that looks weird and unnatural. It was kind of the same thing. Like, no, you two should be enemies in the wild. Why are you being friendly?
So Kyle McCord is listed at 6'3". JJ McCarthy is listed at 6'2". Tom, did it look like a 1 inch difference in height between those two?
I mean, I didn't have a ruler out, but I would guess that is probably not exactly an inch. Maybe one of them was wearing cleats. It's hard to say. Who's to know?
True. Yeah, yes. Who is to know? So I thought that was interesting where those two quarterbacks are lined up, and I don't even know if we ever got into, we did, about Ohio State lying to JJ McCarthy, and I always enjoy following the Ohio State and the Michigan commits who are tied closely together like this, and seeing how things turn out for the two schools and the bragging rights and all of that. There were, I believe, 4 Ohioans in this top 100, where you had Jack Sawyer at number 3, Lorenzo Styles Jr. at number 25 overall, Najee Story, the defensive end from Solon, number 67, and then Ben Chrisman at number 91, offensive lineman out of Richfield, Ohio, who I believe like in the 24/7 was maybe like the number 25 player. So he'll take a little bit of a hit in the composite with this one, because he was a borderline 5-star guy. I guess he needs to get to camps and start to impress the people and get those stars, because, Tom, that's what it's all about. But in terms of like 5-star guys, I think they'll fluctuate between like 28 and 34. The top 28 or 34 guys, 25 to 32 guys are end up being 5 stars and rivals, if you care about that sort of thing. So right now, Lorenzo Styles on the cusp, just needs to, or he's right there, just needs to continue telling rivals what they want to hear and going to their camps and that sort of thing, because you kind of have to do that as well.
You do have to play the game a little bit if you're worried about that. I would say that at number 91 overall, Ben Chrisman is probably safely within the take range for Ohio State at this point. If they're making their decision based on that top 100, like, yeah, that's fine.
You got lucky, Chrisman.
I suppose we will allow it. I suppose that's the official position of Ohio State University there. I think he's someone who I always feel like offensive linemen, the rankings that change a good bit one way or the other. There's a lot of fluctuation there once you do see them in camps, because a lot of times Ben Chrisman is playing in a smaller conference. He's not like a tiny school conference, but he's playing in a smaller conference. So you don't really necessarily see him going against top level competition in games. So those camps, see how he pass protects against a kind of top level defensive end, that kind of stuff. So those rankings can bounce around a little bit, but yeah, he is based on where the consensus is right now. I think he is going to end up going to college and having his tuition paid for. So he'll be just fine.
Although, did you see the picture of Jack Sawyer and Ben Chrisman at Ohio State this past weekend?
No, I don't think I saw that one.
Chrisman is listed at 6'6". Jack Sawyer is listed at 6'5". And if Jack Sawyer is 6'5", then based on the way this picture was, Chrisman is probably like 6'2.5". So maybe it's just they were standing and maybe the way they were standing made it look a little off. But maybe like rivals saw that picture and like, whoa, 6'2" tackle. We better take him down to like 91, because that's where you'll find the 6'2" tackles still in the top 100.
Maybe the floor is slanted. You don't know.
That's right. You don't know. And in which case, you might want to get that floor fixed, because there's like, it's a new staging area for photos with like work construction equipment and sledgehammers and stuff. So, OSHA might want to check that out. I'm just saying. Tom, anything else before we answer just a couple of listener questions? We'll push a bunch to next week's show. And we still have a whole bunch of offensive stuff to talk about. Offensive, not offensive. Offensive stuff to talk about next week. But do you have anything else before we get to the questions?
Let's get right to those questions. I think we've kept them waiting long enough. And just to give people an indication how long we have kept them waiting, here's the first question from @Zadaya. How important is it for OSU to get a defensive recruit before the beginning of the fall? All the current recruits, save Cavazos, are on offense, which makes sense because of last year, but can OSU afford to wait until October before getting any great defensive recruits? I'm going to jump in and say it is extremely important, based on when you asked this question, for Ohio State to land 3-ish big defensive recruits before, say, June 25th. What do you think, Gerd?
Yeah, I definitely think it's important. And not just for school and for the team, but for all of mankind. If they don't land recruits, I think like the Mayan apocalypse will happen. So, yes, they definitely need, not just for the Buckeyes, but to save all of mankind, they need somebody to commit. And as long as somebody commits, we'll keep trucking. You know, mankind will keep right on going. But if it doesn't happen, probably this is the last podcast you'll ever get to listen to. So in which case, you're welcome, and it's a great way to go out. But on the downside, if they get a commit, we'll keep on going on, and this will just have to be like a very good podcast moment in your life.
The only kind of moment that this podcast brings into your lives. Yeah. Very, very good ones.
Pretty much.
It is kind of important to bring in a couple more defensive players. Like you didn't want that hanging out there that long. Because there is a lot of recruiting that is momentum and is storylines. And, right now, the story around Penn State is, hey, there's a whole bunch of guys decommitting. That's kind of weird. That's not great. And that's something that can kind of snowball and become its own story. Had Ohio State gone into the fall with one defensive player committed, that is kind of the same, like, hey, that's weird. What's going on there? And people start looking for reasons that there's an issue. And even if there's not an issue, then it can become an issue just in and of itself. So yeah. adding in a Clark Phillips, adding in a Ty Hamilton, like, yeah, that starts solving that problem right there. And then it stops being something that, it stops being a story because now it's not a story anymore.
Yeah, it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Then you have defensive recruits like, why aren't others people going in there? Well, I'm not going to go there if nobody else is going. But you also, we talked to the coaches a couple weeks ago, and really Hafley and Madison were both like, well, we've got visits coming, so things are fine. Ryan Day essentially said, talk to me in July. We'll see how things are in July. We've got plenty of visits coming. If they're not here, basically they'll be here, and just you'll see by July that there will be commits and all will be well. And so far he's right.
Next question from @Stewart_E4 US Vet. Why are Penn State fans so salty when it comes to OSU and the commitment of Julian Fleming? What do you consider the biggest rivalry? I'm not sure how this is a question. What do you consider the biggest rivalry? OSU versus Michigan, mm-hmm. Michigan versus Michigan State, or OSU versus Penn State? This could be a current events question.
Gosh, Tom, we could spend an entire show talking about what is the biggest rivalry between Michigan and Ohio State, Michigan and Michigan State, and Ohio State and Penn State, because there's a lot of great arguments to be made for any one of those. The best arguments, Tom, are obviously, you know what? I can't continue. It's Ohio State, Michigan. One of my favorite rivalries is definitely Michigan State. And one of my other favorite rivalries is Michigan, Notre Dame. But Michigan State is great. I love it. They hate each other. They like Ohio State and Michigan hate each other, but there's respect there. Like there's no respect between Michigan and Michigan State. They hate each other. And at any moment that game can become a bar fight, and that's fun and that's great. But yeah, when was the last time Ohio State or Michigan State was big on a national scale. Yes, is like the muffed punt has affected things before, but not of their own doing. I've already talked too much about this, Tom. Would you care to weigh in?
Yes, I think that there is a certain beauty to those in-state rivalries, especially those in-state conference rivalries. Like Iowa State is great. Like that is its own just absolute hilarious dumpster fire of a game every year, but there's not like a conference thing on the line there. It's just they play in week 2, and by week 7, everyone forgets who actually won the game. It just remembers that it was a terrible game. Michigan State is like the Oklahoma State or Kansas State or any of those like in-state rivalries where it's also a division, also a conference thing. And there's just a lot on the line, and that it's just fan bases who just live with each other all the time and just absolutely hate living around people who, if your team has lost, you have to live with it and see it right in your face for the next 365 days. Unless you're in Toledo, that's not really a thing with Ohio State and Michigan. Like if you're in Michigan, you're not seeing that many Ohio State fans all the time. So there is a certain beauty to that, but yes, in terms of rivalries like Michigan State, yes, that is a good spiteful in-state rivalry. Ohio State and Michigan is the number one rivalry in all of sports, not really even a question. And then Ohio State Penn State is just two teams that are in the same division that are in bordering states. Like that people keep trying to make that a rivalry, and it's like, if Ohio State Penn State's a rivalry, then Ohio State Michigan State's a rivalry, right. And Ohio State, like all the things that make Ohio State Penn State a rivalry make 5 other games a rivalry on their schedule every year. And at that point, if everything's a rivalry, nothing's a rivalry. So, and as far as why Penn State fans are so salty when it comes to Ohio State, the commitment of Julian Fleming, he is a super stud wide receiver prospect, top 10 overall player in the country. I think he's 5th or 6th, like in any player, regardless of position. He's from relatively close to Penn State. He is or was dating someone who was on the Penn State track team. Everyone just assumed he was going to Penn State and this was going to be this big crown jewel for them. And then he not only doesn't go to Penn State, but he goes to Ohio State, which is a team that has basically dragged Penn State through the mud basically this entire century. I mean, everyone knows the Ohio State 16-2 versus Michigan thing, but Ohio State against Penn State is like 13-5, something like that, 12-6 in the last 18 years. Like Ohio State has dominated Penn State almost as much as they've dominated Michigan, and that's irritating to Penn State fans. And this is another L that they have to hold. And so, yeah, it doesn't take much to get the denizens of BWI too salty. So that's really not that much of a surprise.
No, but Ohio State fans were salty when Jackson Carman left for Clemson. So I think anytime a fan base loses an in-state kid, it doesn't help when that guy is going to Ohio State and who has pounded you. I'm trying to equate it with where somebody could somebody choosing Iowa or Purdue over Ohio State. Yeah, you're going to be salty. Like if Paris Johnson commits to Purdue, Buckeye fans aren't going to be happy. But yeah, that's the nature. That's every 5-star recruit that leaves the state, every high 4-star guy that leaves the state. He's turned his back on his people. He has dishonored his family. He has insulted my family. He has made me look bad in front of my coworkers. And basically, now I'm going to have to spend time on social media tearing him down. And I might even, Tom, if I'm feeling up for it, I might at him. I might at his mom, his dad, and anybody else who's listening. And I may even threaten his pets. Just depends on how I'm feeling that day. Basically, that's the mindset when somebody does this to you. Not to me, to just random people. I wouldn't do this.
Brief note, the official editorial position of the Buckeye Weekly Podcast and the Ozone.net and Ozone Communications LLC. Please don't at the Croots. Thank you. Or their parents or their pets.
Tom,
thank you.
I was talking to you before the show about Randy Wade, Sean Wade's dad, has a podcast called, and I recommend it, called Daddy's Ball, the Daddy's Ball podcast. It's him, and it's along with the father of an Alabama commit, and they basically talk about the recruiting process and as a means of trying to be a resource or service to parents out there who are going through the same thing. But it's also interesting listening, an interesting listen for fans, just sports fans, college football fans, to hear about the process. But on this past week's show, they had Mark Pantoni, who is the recruiting director at Ohio State, and they asked him about fans getting involved on social media, and is there a positive effect to it? And Pantoni was basically like, it does not help, and they would prefer that it didn't happen because more harm than good comes from it. And I think maybe some that may have been seen with the Kendall Milton recruitment, where he comes out of the Georgia visit and things look good for the Bulldogs there, and Ohio State fans kind of go after him a little bit. And Kendall Milton's dad, Chris Milton, is very active on Twitter and will defend his son. And so now you've got this back and forth with Buckeye fans, and you've got Ohio State actively recruiting Kendall Milton. And now their university is being put in a terrible light because of social media. So I don't know that a recruit has ever committed to a school based on tweets saying, hey, commit to this school. We know for a fact, time you go back to like the B-Dubs trivia guru and Alex Anzalone, where fans can have a very negative impact. And you say, don't tweet at recruits. And I know everybody says that. A lot of people still do it. From the horse's mouth, Mark Pantoni, it does not help, and it only hurts.
It's probably a small version of the much bigger life advice that I can give you, which is not just don't tweet at recruits. Don't tweet. Just what if you Twitter : what if we didn't? Just think about it.
That's for everybody. That's for all of us.
Think about it. That is the best life advice I can give you. If you want to live your best life, it does not involve Twitter.
You think about it, Tom. If you live long enough, eventually you will be fired for something you tweet. All of us.
Oh, but what if I got hired for something I tweeted? How great would that be? Last question from Smartwater. A lot of new coaches. Which one is your favorite interview? Jeff Hafley.
Yeah.
Which will have the biggest impact on 2019 performance / improvement? Jeff Hafley. Yeah. 2019-20 recruiting. Heartline doesn't count, of course. Okay. Jeff Hafley. And which one do you guys suspect might not fit or stick? Not leaving for an amazing job, but going the Withers route. Everett Withers, the former defensive coordinator in 2013, who left for the James Madison job. Is that right?
Yeah.
An FCS job, yep. Right? Yeah, it was James Madison.
Voluntarily. Yeah, totally. I don't like answering this question because I don't really have a feel for who's going to struggle or anything like that. I think you point at Matt Barnes because assistant secondary coach, what exactly does that mean? But this is also a guy who was thrust into a position at Maryland as with everything going on terribly there. And, he was calling plays there. So he's an up and comer where Ryan Day seems to know what he's doing on these coaches. And we don't, it's still early. Obviously we haven't seen anybody perform yet. I don't really have a negative feeling towards any of these guys. Like when Tim Beck was hired, like I think I've probably mentioned this before, where I did like top 20 guys, 20 names to watch to replace Tom Herman, and like Lincoln Riley is there and all of these other names. A name I did not put on there, even though I had heard it, was Tim Beck, because there's no way that Urban Meyer is going to hire Tim Beck based on the fact that Taylor Martinez never got better at Nebraska, and quarterbacks didn't really ever get better under Tim Beck. And so then, Tim Beck gets hired, and you're like, well, that doesn't seem like it's going to work. And Bill Davis, hindsight is 20/20, but foresight wasn't too bad either. You look at his Wikipedia page, and every 2 years he's somewhere else. And it's not because he's moving up. It's because he's now he's the defensive coordinator here. Now he's a linebackers coach here because the defensive coordinator job he didn't do very well. Now he did pretty good at linebacker, so now he's a defensive coordinator again. But now he's 2 years later now, for 6 straight years, he's a linebackers coach at 3 other places. And obviously the whole best man thing, and you're like, well, yeah. Plus he was a QC guy before that. And those are hires where you're like, yeah, maybe that would have been Brian Hartline, Tom, where it's like, yeah, well, he didn't really like in Columbus radio hosts. If you produce for a while, you'll eventually get a show. You move up. And this is like where guys are just moving up organically or through lack of wanting to go get somebody else. Obviously, Brian Hartline is proving that one wrong. But those are 2 guys in the past where you're like, yeah, that doesn't look great. Right now, I don't have any of those feelings.
The moving up thing is interesting because sometimes you get a Brian Hartline and sometimes you get a Nick Siciliano,
right?
And those are different ends of the spectrum. It's way too early to judge any of the new coaches with any kind of a finality. Because we'll have a little confessional moment. Pull up a chair. This time last year, I would have told you that I was pretty confident that Alex Grinch was headed for big things at Ohio State. So, and I think there's reason to think that not everything that happened last year was Alex Grinch's fault, but Alex Grinch was in charge of the safeties. Alex Grinch was listed as a co-defensive coordinator, and he wasn't King Midas last year. There was nothing that he touched that turned to gold. So, it may not have all been him, but it didn't go great. And so it's worth just kind of giving it a year. And you really probably need to give it 2 years with these guys because there's a little bit of, there's probably a little bit of a lag in terms of getting stuff implemented and, defensive coordinators getting a new system in place and all that kind of stuff. Don't judge them based on what things look like in week 3 this year. And unless things are trending terribly, you might not even want to judge them completely at the end of the first year. You kind of need to give guys a couple of years to really see if things are really working or really not. So yeah, I would say way too soon to answer that last one right now, but ask again later, maybe end of the year, and I'll make Gert answer it.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Grinch, and I'm pretty sure before the whole Zach Smith thing happened and Ryan Day was thrust into it, we may have talked about like who is more likely to be the next head coach at Ohio State, Alex Grinch or Ryan Day, because that's how highly Grinch was thought of. And when you look at who when you're trying to project, you're not going to project Graciano to Ohio State head coach. You're going to look at somebody who is on a similar level but younger and has the trajectory is pointing that way. I would go back and maybe try to find that show, but it's probably some of those early shows, Tom. Even they're not once you started coming on, they're probably not the greatest shows like these are now. So I don't always like to go back into the archives, but I will if I could find a clip saying, yeah, Day is never going to be a head coach, and I guarantee it's going to be Alex Grinch. If I could find you saying that, I will pour through hours upon hours of tape, actual physical tape, and not just recorded digital audio stuff, like actual tape, reel to reel. If I knew that sound was out there, Tom, I'd go look for it.
Just start checking all the Scotch tape in your house first, and duct tape, and see if you find it on there. Maybe it's worth spending some time looking for it this week for sure.
All right, I'll do that. All right, I think that covers it. We thank you all for your patience. I hope this show is worth the 3 weeks, 2 weeks since, not 3 weeks, I guess, since our last show. I do have some stuff to send out, so I thank you for the ratings and reviews. We always appreciate that. Continue to do that. It helps us be seen. We thank you, those of you who have. Tom, we are like 4 weeks out from Big Ten Media Days. Fall camp, I believe, starts on August 2nd this year. So last year was like late July. This year it's going to be early August. And we're not too far away.
And this year we might even get to cover some of that fall camp, which would be really exciting.
Oh man, yeah. Huh. Well, let's knock on some wood, Tom. All right, let's call it a night. Let's call it a day. Thank you all for listening. We will talk to you next week.
Well, she threw away the motel key. I wish it never meant nothing to me. Say you will, now say you will. Oh yeah. Say you will, now say you will. If you tell me that tomorrow's alright, we could steal a car and leave